Well, folks, it's that time again. Another year has come and gone, and here I am again with another subjective top 10 games of the year list. Emphasis on subjective, because, quite frankly, some of my entries this year are going to be controversial, and some of my opinions on some of the entries are also going to be controversial. That being said, I implore you to remain civil and act like mature adults in the comments. I will not be tolerating any nonsense around here. Besides, I don't know what you want from me. The well to pick from was pretty dry this year, and a lot of the best games are from genres I personally don't enjoy. Well, anyways, with all that being said, let's do it.
I still can't believe you went. What are you thinking? Going to that place? Wish you hadn't got yourself into this mess, but you did. You can't run forever.
Still Wakes the Deep is a Lovecraftian sci-fi horror game that takes place on an oil rig. For all intents and purposes, you could basically argue that this is a modern-day retelling of The Thing. You play as Kaz, Scottish oil rig worker who took this job against his wife's wishes. Boy, I bet he wish he hadn't. After he gets fired from his job due to a scuffle with a coworker that got the police involved, things quickly go from bad to worse when the other workers accidentally drill into an unknown substance and end up awakening a cosmic horror. Soon, the oil rig is filled with pink oozing tendrils, the whole place is slowly falling apart and sinking into the ocean, and to top it all off, Kaz's co-workers are all turning into what can only be described as giant walking brain tumors with tendrils. Now it's just a simple matter of modern horror game formula as you run, jump, hide, sneak, distract, pull levers, climb ladders, crawl through vents and die, over and over and over again. Although this game doesn't necessarily bring anything new to the table, and it definitely overdoes it on interaction mechanics that could have just been cutscenes. At the same time, not since Soma have I felt this level of ick and existentialism while sneaking around Lovecraftian body horror abominations. Mechanically it plays well, and the simplicity of throwing something at a wall to make noise to distract the enemies so you can run past them takes me back to the early days of YouTube horror games like Amnesia. And although this plays and feels like a frictional game, it's actually developed by the Chinese Room, who, ironically enough, did do an Amnesia game. So in a way, we've come full circle. But what also sells this game is the fact that everything around you feels alive. From the very beginning, you are presented with a lot of NPCs, other workers on the oil rig, but as disaster starts to strike, they slowly start dropping like flies, slowly dwindling the numbers of the people around you as you start to feel lonelier and more isolated as you move forward, and everyone around you keeps dying. But it also keeps the game from exclusively being a silent protagonist cat and mouse game. There is actually a sense of progression and several conversations to be had, whether in person or through optional phone conversations you can find throughout the game. The dialogue is also pretty hilarious due to everyone speaking native Scottish and leaning heavy on the sarcasm.
I think I need my insulin.
What? You're fucking kidding right now.
Oh, I'm sorry to inconvenience you, Mr. Bloody Fit and Healthy. I tell you what, I'll have a little chat with my pancreas, shall I, and tell it to pull its socks up.
Alright, fuck's sake.
The story is well handled, the graphics are effective, the atmosphere is on point, the ending was extremely memorable, the enemies are genuinely unnerving, as is most of the nightmare-fueled body horror imagery littered throughout the game, and the gameplay mechanics might leave a little bit to be desired, but for the most part run smoothly. You know me, I have to stick an indie horror game in the list every year, and this was the one this year for sure.
Jesus fucking Christ! Fuck! Fuck! Fucking hell!
I know, buddy. Just give me a minute. This'll work, right?
Yeah, I know, but look, we're not having this conversation on my channel. Taste is subjective, and I'm entitled to what I like. I never have and never will give less than a rat's ass about the quote-unquote attractiveness of a playable character. That's not what I play games for. Besides, in my opinion, she looks like she fits right in with the 80s, which is kind of the point, because this game takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Getting away from the laser sword fights and high fantasy shenanigans of your usual Star Wars fare, this game dares to be a bit more nitty and gritty, focusing on a smuggler rather than a Jedi, which brings you into a more down-to-earth experience that focuses on what life is like in the slums of the galaxy and letting you rub elbows with different crime syndicates from Star Wars history. In this game, you play as Kay Vess, a smuggler who found herself at the wrong place at the wrong time and is now on the run from the Empire, who thinks she's a member of the Rebels due to some inadvertent interactions. After running away and crash landing on another planet, she is soon contacted by a man who wants to hire her for a heist job against the very Empire she's running from. Hoping that the money will help her start a new life and get the Imperials off her back, Kay agrees and thus starts a journey of recruiting different specialists in a sort of Ocean's 13 kind of way as she prepares to do the biggest space heist yet. Now, at the time of writing this, the developers have said that they are going to patch the game to make the stealth easier, but I will say that my experience with the game was not that bad. I actually found it to be some of the best stealth that Ubisoft has ever done. That being said, due to my years and years of seasoned practice with Assassin's Creed and horror games, I am genuinely good at stealth games for the most part. Something about sneakily taking enemies out in one hit instead of taking several hits to fight them up front has always appealed to me. Makes me feel powerful and kind of spooky, like a mysterious ghost in the night. Anyways, though, although it might be a stealth game, at its core, stealth is not always a forced mechanic. You can fight your way out of most situations. With blaster fire and a lot of the stealth missions that you do, you'll end up having to fight your way back out once you get the item you need anyways due to the alarms going off. But to help you with your stealth and other things, though, you have a little lizard companion called Nyx. You can send him out to pickpocket items from enemies, reach items that you can't reach, open doors from the other side, and even distract or attack enemies so that you can take them down. It adds a certain level of strategy to the stealth that I appreciate. Of course, this is a Ubisoft game, so you can expect it to be open world and come with both the pros and cons of that as a result. Riding around on the speeder bike is really cool, but a lot of the areas just feel very empty, and the driving controls of the bike in question are a little janky. What I thought was really cool, though, is that throughout the game you do missions for different crime syndicates and gain favor with them so that they will let you into restricted areas or give you discounts on merchandise. It even affects some of the people who join you for the final mission of the game. But since these crime syndicates are all at each other's throats, sometimes doing a favor for one will cause you to lose favor with another, and if your favor with a particular syndicate goes too far down, then they will start attacking you on sight, kind of like when you're wanted for theft in a particular city in Skyrim. You can also end up being wanted by the Imperials in a sort of GTA-style system where death troopers will start hunting you down. On top of being a stealth game and an open world game, it's also kind of a dogfighting game because whenever you get in your ship and take off into space to travel to another planet, there's always a chance you'll run into enemy ships that you have to fight in a sort of flight simulator style. So yeah, this game has a lot of problems, but I overall enjoyed it. There was just something very immersive about living in this gritty underground Star Wars world that doesn't really get enough attention in the bigger media, and there are some really cool Easter eggs for fans of the movies. This is a divisive entry on my list to be sure, but trust that it's not the only one.
Okay, here we go.
Copy that.
Why tear down the veil, knowing all the lives it'll cost?
We shared a journey years ago. Do you believe that I would do this if there was some other better option?
The pillar's weak, but
It isn't falling. We need to push it.
I'm with you.
Together. Now!
You came a long way and made a valiant effort, Varric, but this story does not end with my downfall.
See? I told you Star Wars wasn't the only divisive entry. I don't need to justify my subjective taste to anyone, but I'm going to anyways, because if I didn't, there wouldn't be any commentary. I know deep down that this is probably objectively the worst game in the Dragon Age series, but quite frankly, I like it better than Inquisition. Inquisition was a step in the wrong direction for me by becoming a huge open world game with tedious fetch quests, a very bland and dry art style, and companions that were mostly unappeasable assholes. Unfortunately, Veilguard goes too far in the opposite direction. The art style in this game looks like the Pixar filter on Snapchat, and everyone is way too nice and agreeable for the most part. At least with you. That doesn't stop them from being at each other's throats, though. I've had to break up several arguments in this game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Picking up where the Trespasser DLC for Inquisition leaves off, Dragon Age the Veilguard begins with Solus succeeding in his plans to rip a hole in the veil. But due to some interference from franchise regular Varric and a ragtag group of misfits he's recruited, including you, things don't go exactly according to plan. And now 2 ancient elven gods have been unleashed into the world to rain terror down upon it. A new blight has started that's unlike any we've ever seen before, and demons are running free. Now, like every other game, it's once again up to you, the player, to recruit a small army to take on this new threat, or die trying. The story for this game is definitely engaging, to the point where I definitely had to see it through. And without spoiling anything, I will say that one thing in particular I appreciate is that they brought back a very insane Mass Effect 2 mechanic in regards to the end of the game. Although the difficulty in making the correct choices this time around is much, much simpler. But such is the hand-holding way of modern games. That being said, I'm a fan of the combat in this game, but not if you're playing as a warrior. In these games I usually tend to default to a sword and shield warrior, but that was a mistake here. They definitely have the most clunky and boring combat. If you want to have real fun here, play as a rogue, especially a dwarven rogue. You'll be running up enemies like walls and doing backflips off of them. It's so much cooler. So your mileage may vary depending on the class you choose, but combat can either be a slog or some of the most fun you've ever had depending on how you play it. I genuinely like most of the companions in this one. They are all pretty likable this time around, even if some of them do have attitude problems. Dragon Age has always had a mixture of very agreeable and very disagreeable companions to keep you on your toes with the moral choices and ambiguity. But in this game, your companions seem to agree with you more often than not outside of major story choices. For better or worse, it's definitely the most accessible Dragon Age game so far. I definitely have some issues with this game as a longtime fan of the series, but I had more issues with Inquisition if I'm being completely honest. This game is 1 step forward but 2 steps back, but I'm okay with it because I still enjoyed it. And maybe I'm biased because it's a Dragon Age game, and much like Final Fantasy, I'm going to enjoy it because of what it is, regardless of its flaws. But that doesn't mean I'm blind to them, it just means I'm nuanced. This game does feel like it has transitioned from dark fantasy to high fantasy, but it's also been a good 30 to 40 years since the first game. In-universe, I mean. I'm not that old, Jesus. But also, your actions in the previous games in terms of doing heroic things to help end elf slavery and mage segregation has led to a more open-minded future. To a degree, anyway. There's definitely still slavery and bigotry going about, but there's also still people actively fighting to stop it. You also now have what I like to call magic science technology, like the Dwarven ruins in Skyrim, floating cities and magical artifacts that are activated by electricity. Things have come a long way in terms of technology in this series. But of course, that modern feeling does have some downfalls as well, like how a lot of the dialogue in this game feels like it's straight from a sitcom.
Hurry!
Mila, you're a lifesaver.
Darkspawn almost had you for lunch.
Well, let's not hang around for dinner.
I will also say that the new art style does make some things look weird, like Darkspawn, but I'm also willing to handwave that as these Darkspawn being mixed with demons due to the weird stuff going on caused by Solus's actions. So overall, it's a mixed bag for me. It's genuinely a fun game. It's a solid 7 out of 10, and I'm a champion of the 7 out of 10 games. They are the video game equivalent of turn your brain off popcorn flicks where you can just sit back and enjoy it and not have to think about it too hard. Sometimes, that's all you need.
That's the danger in recruiting competent people. They bring more interesting and complicated problems along with them. So go help Rook. Support them. solve those problems.
You take one, I'll take the other.
Speaking of mixed bags, you might think I'm being facetious by putting this game at number 7, but genuinely I couldn't bring myself to give it any more credit than it actually deserves. Is it top 10 worthy? Absolutely. Is it top 5 worthy? Not at all. Picking up right where Final Fantasy VII Remake left off, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth sees Cloud and his friends following the mysterious cloaked figures, hoping that they will eventually lead them to Sephiroth. What makes this entry in the remake trilogy different from this part of the original PS1 game is primarily the fact that the ending of Part 1 created an alternate timeline where Zack from Crisis Core is still alive, and that means you will spend a decent amount of time playing as him in this game as well. Aside from that, though, it also differs significantly in a lot of ways while simultaneously maintaining the same story beats and locations. So even though we were broken free from the shackles of destiny and promised that anything would happen, the writers still opted to stay more or less faithful to the source material. Was it perhaps fear of being blasphemous by changing too much, or was it meta-commentary about all paths eventually leading to the same destination? Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is a game of high highs and low lows. Everything it does get right, it excels at. Everything it gets wrong, however, stands out like a sore thumb in comparison. First, the positives. The combat is very well executed. Synergy moves that you do with your companions are extremely useful and fun to watch, and the mixture of real-time combat and a tactical command menu brings a perfect hybrid between action and turn-based, which keeps the game fun to play for those who prefer action without turning it into a mindless button masher for those who prefer strategy. The character development and voice acting is amazing. Some of the best moments in the game are when Barrett puts on a pair of sunglasses to hide that he's crying. The visuals are all mostly amazing, although there are some issues with performance mode. The summons are absolutely god tier, as they should be, and there's a pretty cool side story and the secret boss involving Gilgamesh. The locations that you visit are faithfully recreated, and believe it or not, the parts where you play as Zack are genuinely interesting and add a whole new multiversal layer to the narrative that wasn't present before. Unfortunately, though, the game is held back by a lot of problems, including Ubisoft-style open-world nonsense to pad the runtime, tedious fetch quests that feel like a chore, terribly designed stealth missions to unlock chocobos, and around Chapter 9, the game takes a huge nosedive in terms of pacing and doesn't pick up again until Chapter 12 or 13. All that being said, I definitely enjoyed my time with this game overall, enough that I put in 85 hours before finishing it and did every single side quest and every piece of world intel against my better judgment. It's definitely a step backwards from the first entry in this trilogy, but I enjoyed most of it, and the final dungeon in particular is one of the best final dungeons I've ever been through in a JRPG. And let's not forget that the soundtrack, like always, is amazing, but it's Final Fantasy, so of course it is. I am genuinely looking forward to the third and final entry.
I am thou, thou art I. From the sea of thy soul I come. I am Orpheus, master of strings.
One of the most popular Persona games of all time, Persona 3 Reload is a modern-day remake of this PS2 classic, bringing with it a bunch of the quality-of-life changes and stylized visual flair of Persona 5. In this game, you play as exchange student Makoto, who unknowingly moves into a dorm room with a bunch of classmates that are part of a secret society of shadow hunting elites. Every night at midnight, time freezes for an hour, and the unassuming general public remains blissfully unaware. But those with special powers have the ability to stay conscious and mobile during these moments, and one of two things will happen. Either they will awaken to their persona and take up arms against the shadows, or they will be overtaken by the shadows and become sort of a walking zombie in the real world. Not long after moving into the dorm, Makoto awakens to his persona and becomes a member of the group, and thus your adventure begins. Like every other Persona game, this one sees you balancing all the aspects of your life in the real world, including going to school, maintaining relationships, going to work, gardening, hanging out at the arcade, going to the movies, and so on. But also, at night, if you choose, you can visit Tartarus, a giant tower that only appears during the midnight hour. You see, whereas Persona 4 and 5 had several different dungeons that you would visit based on the mental state of certain characters, Persona 3 instead has a multi-floor tower where your goal is to reach the top before the end of the game. Because, just like the other Persona games, it's a race against the clock to get everything done. Certain social links are only available on certain days, and some are only available during the day or night. Same goes for special deals at restaurants or certain events at certain stores. So you really have to prioritize whether you want to raise your social links or social stats, the latter of which is required to unlock some social links in the first place. But it's all worth it, for you see, every social link is tied to a specific tarot card arcana, and when you increase your bond with those characters, in turn, so too does increase the power of your personas that match that arcana, allowing you to create even more powerful personas to use in battle. Speaking of battles, combat in this game uses the same stylistic turn-based but still fast and punchy combat system as Persona 5 Royal, using a Pokemon-style strategy system that relies on exploiting elemental weaknesses and afflicting status ailments to get the upper hand by knocking every enemy down so you can do an all-out attack. The story in this one might be the darkest one in the series, dealing very heavily with themes of death and the fear of dying. This is driven home even further with the visual metaphor of the characters having to put a gun to their head and pull the trigger in order to summon their persona. Not quite dark enough to be horror adjacent, but still visually disturbing nonetheless. With at least 80 hours worth of content, this game is the gift that keeps on giving for those that like longevity in their purchase. To top that off with the fact that the post-game story content from Persona 2 FES on PS2 has been added to this version as DLC, and that's about another 20 hours of content. This game heavily rivals its predecessors in all the right ways.
Now!
Now's your chance!
Like fish in a barrel! There's nothing! Out of my sight! C'est magnifique!
In my restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill. You promised you'd take me there again someday. But you never did. Well, I'm alone there now. In our special place. Waiting for you.
I'm not one to rub I told you so's in people's faces, but oh, who are we kidding? I'm definitely that type. When I heard that one of my favorite horror developers, Bloober Team, was handling the Silent Hill 2 remake, I was genuinely excited. But apparently I was one of the few. Several people are not fans of their previous games, and they were worried about how they would handle this. Even more so after the initial trailer came out and focused too much on combat. But man, oh man, did they absolutely nail this. If there's one thing about this developer's previous games, no matter what else you think of them, one thing I think we can all agree on is that they are really good at atmosphere, and Silent Hill is nothing without atmosphere. Meet James Sunderland, a man looking for his wife who is supposed to be dead, but after he receives a letter from her summoning him to a little town called Silent Hill, he takes a journey that he will not soon forget. Once he gets there, he starts exploring, and he slowly starts to realize that things aren't quite right. The whole town is shrouded in a mysterious fog. There are weird, armless creatures squirming about, and literally everyone he runs into seems to be acting very odd, almost as if they're having a different experience than him. What was once a simple missing person search is now a fight for survival, as the town grows more and more hostile as the night goes on and people are being hunted down by a knife-wielding, triangle-headed monstrosity. At its core, this game is basically survival horror. For all intents and purposes, it plays very similar to the Resident Evil remakes. However, where it differs is in style. Resident Evil is more sci-fi body horror, whereas Silent Hill is definitely psychological horror. The grotesque and unnatural movements of the enemies, the unnerving quiet of the foggy town, the decrepit hallways and barbed wire decor, the dimly lit hallways, the strange noises in the distance, the radio static playing from the controller speaker when enemies are nearby, the disassociative behaviors of other human characters making you feel like you're never any better off with them than you were alone, and the absolute panic-inducing boss monsters. This game follows a pretty simple formula. Go to a building, experience nightmare, find keys to open doors, solve puzzles, fight enemies, escape from building, move on to next building, rinse and repeat. Puzzles in this game can vary from the answer literally being handed to you to the equivalent of that trap from the first Saw movie where the guy with the flammable jelly had to find the combination on a wall full of numbers. A lot of times it boils down to very simple word puzzles where you just have to interpret the hint and then find the answer in the environment around you. Other times it's about fighting through a group of enemies to reach a lever or an emblem that you need to put in a slot somewhere. Combat in this game is intentionally clunky, and that works to its advantage in terms of inducing fear in the player. James is not a mercenary or a cop. He is just a regular guy trying to survive, swinging a piece of wood at nightmare creatures. So the combat should be clunky because James is not an action hero. He's a normal dude with some major mental health issues. The game maintains basically all of the important parts of the original while changing some things up so that it can be fully enjoyable for original fans and newcomers alike. For example, this game has several puzzles that weren't in the original game. However, there are collectibles you can find that are basically homages to things in the original that were cut out of this. Some fun Easter eggs for us old heads. The game also maintains its several endings mechanic from the original. These endings aren't based on choices that you make so much as how you play the game overall. Things like maintaining your health and helping a character you escort can make the difference between a good or bad ending. There's also 3 secret endings that you can unlock on New Game Plus playthrough, and yes, they kept the dog ending from the original. Every time I play this game, I feel gross. It is extremely oppressive and suffocating, but that's a good thing. That's how horror should feel when you're playing it. I definitely have to take it in small sips like a fine wine, but also like a fine wine, it only gets better with age. And this remake shows that sometimes a modernized version of an old classic can actually be an improvement. I would never go back to the original anymore, it just hasn't aged well mechanically, but I would gladly play this one again and again.
It's hot as hell in here.
You see it too? For me, it's always like this.
Once upon a time, there was a plucky squire named Jot.
This game had been on my radar since it was announced, but I didn't expect it to be as good as it was. Inspired very heavily by Legend of Zelda, The Plucky Squire is an action-adventure game where you play as a literal storybook character traveling from page to page in the book itself. But when an evil wizard uses his mysterious magic on you, you find yourself being transported out of the book and onto the desk of the writer who created you. Now, using your newfound powers to travel between the 2D paper world and the 3D real world, you must venture forth with your friends, solving puzzles, fighting monsters, and eventually taking down the evil wizard to set things right. At its core, when you are inside the book or on a flat surface, the game plays a lot like your classic Legend of Zelda games, but with a very unique twist in several mechanics. For one thing, since you are inside a book, you can often take words off the page and replace them with other words to change the environment around you, such as taking a big frog blocking your path and making him smaller by changing the words so that you can get past him. You will find yourself leaving the book several times throughout the story in order to make progress, and while you are in the real world, you will sometimes jump into other paper-like substances that change up the game genre a little. For example, jumping into a Magic the Gathering style card and having a turn-based battle. It keeps the game from being too samey throughout, and presents a wide variety of gameplay mechanics that harkens back to RPGs throughout history, not unlike Evoland. Another thing I thought was really cool was that once you leave the book, you can actually turn the pages of the book to easily jump back to areas that you've already been to. Sometimes you actually have to use this page-turning mechanic to solve puzzles or grab words or items from one page and bring them to another. It really does make you think. This game was a nice little surprise this year, an indie gem that deserves a lot more attention. It was released for free day one on PlayStation Plus Extra, and I am so glad that it was, because I might not have gotten to it right away if it wasn't.
Safi. Safi? Hey. You okay?
Although less controversial than some of the other entries on my list, this is another game that was divisive among its fanbase, primarily because of the lack of Chloe. But I was okay with it. To me, it's more realistic that significant changes have happened in 10 years. You could be friends or partners with someone for a decade, and it's still possible that they could end up betraying you or you go your separate ways for various reasons. Life is strange like that. On that note, in this game we play as Max Caulfield again, a character that we haven't seen since the first game in the series. Depending on the choice you made at the end of the first game, Chloe either died or her and Max ended up together. Either way, though, Max has been on the road for a while and has finally settled in a new location. Completely cut off from her time powers in the previous game, Max wants nothing more than to just live a normal life with her new friends. But when one of her new friends is mysteriously murdered, Max has an emotional reaction that unlocks a new power for her. The ability to rip open a hole in the fabric of reality and travel into an alternate reality where her dead friend is still alive. Now, it's a race against the clock as Max tries to solve the murder of her friend in one timeline while simultaneously preventing it from happening in another. That's what the game is at its core, but it's a lot more than that overall. Sometimes you have to use this timeline splitting power to solve puzzles. For example, when in one timeline you can actually eavesdrop on people in the opposite timeline. There will be spiritual apparitions of them that you can use your powers to listen to, and since you are existing in a parallel universe, they have no idea that you are standing right next to them listening to their every word. It's really cool, like being a multi-dimensional spy. Another thing I like about this game is the aesthetic. When you are in the timeline where your friend died, everything is blue and depressing and there's a heaviness hanging in the air, and no one seems to care that it's Christmas time. However, in the timeline where your friend is still alive, everything is more orange and warm and cheery, and Christmas decorations are put up all over the place. It's a nice touch that's not exactly subtle, but also very effective in terms of setting the mood between the two timelines. Also, since this is one of those games where you make choices that have consequences, the choices in this game that you make have consequences that spread across both timelines. In my playthrough, for example, the character I chose to flirt with understood my emotional absence in the timeline where my friend died. However, in the timeline where she didn't, I was called out on that emotional absence even though I was never present for it. Which to me is a really nice implementation of chaos theory, which was something that was discussed very heavily in the first game. Aside from that, I really like the new cast of characters in this game, and the mystery had me gripped throughout most of the story. Almost every character, including the victim herself, is super suspicious and hiding secrets. I will say though, out of the 5 chapters of this game, the story starts to fall apart around chapter 4. The first 3 chapters are amazing, with great endings, but chapters 4 and 5 kinda lose the plot a little bit. That being said though, I'm willing to forgive it for everything else the game does that I really like. This game wouldn't have made the top 5 if I was being completely objective, but subjectively I really enjoyed it more than I thought I would, considering the negatives I heard going in. The gameplay mechanics are fun, the story had me hooked, the soundtrack is awesome like always, and quite frankly, I'm just a sucker for those choose-your-own-adventure games where you make dialogue options, and what I really appreciate about this one is that conversations feel less like a guessing game of choosing the right answers so you don't piss people off, and instead it comes across more natural with it changing primarily how characters act around you, which makes things more nuanced and less black and white than previous entries in the series. Plus, this game respects your time. Every episode is relatively short, but I'm okay with that. As much as I enjoyed the first game in the series, I noticed when replaying the remastered version that there were some episodes that started to drag on a bit too long. That's not really a problem here. There's no filler. It's all progress. Not to mention that, like always, this game has great LGBTQIA+ representation that is presented naturally without it feeling patronizing. There's also a great PTSD angle that they tackle where Max is having nightmares either about Chloe or Arcadia Bay, depending on your world state. One thing you have to watch out for in this game, though, is that some plot threads are wrapped up or covered in text messages, so it's worth digging into Max's phone and reading your messages every so often. Overall, if you like a good murder mystery, this game was a solid one for me. Just don't expect any kind of solidified closure. All I'll say is that it's very likely we're getting another sequel.
Oh, show me the angle. Oh my god.
What?
How can this be? Was this creature's rebirth Zorba's plan all along?
If it escapes, if it makes it to the city.
It spotted us!
His Highness's home must still stand when he returns. I will end this here!
Another city in ruins. Never again. It dies or I do.
It's coming!
Have you ever wanted a Persona game that was set in a medieval fantasy setting? Well, have I got news for you, because that's exactly what Metaphor Rifantasio is, in every way but name. After the king is murdered and the prince is poisoned, you, along with a ragtag group of mercenaries, sworn to protect the prince, are sent to take down the assassin. But, when an unforeseen event unfolds, the king's old magic comes to life and declares that a new king shall be decided by way of election. Any and all citizens are welcome to campaign. All prospective candidates must race from one location to the next, completing different quests and earning the favor of the general public. Then and only then will the most popular candidate become the new king. Unfortunately for you, the former king's assassin is one of the candidates in this contest, and all candidates are protected by the king's magic, so you cannot physically attack him. So now your goal changes from justice against a Kingslayer to running in the campaign yourself for a chance to get close to him, and thus begins your campaign trail. As I said before, this game plays a lot like a Persona game. You hang out with your companions and increase your bond with them. You increase your social stats to gain more favor of the people. There are side quests you can do that are locked behind having certain social stats at a certain level. Instead of personas, you get arcanas you can equip that are basically the equivalent of different Final Fantasy job classes. And combat, once again, is a stylized turn-based combat with flashy menus focused on afflicting status ailments and exploiting elemental weaknesses. Although this game does a few things different from Persona that I appreciate as well. For one thing, all the enemies in this game are basically regular monsters that live in this world, not otherworldly shadow creatures. However, there are some enemies known as humans that are basically body horror monstrosities that have some human-like features. For you see, all of the other characters in this world are human-looking but with animal-like features, such as cat ears, foxtails, or goat horns. On top of that, your character carries around a book that tells the tale of a fantasy world that sounds exactly like our real world. When you combine all that with the name of the game, I think there's definitely a message to be found, but I'll let you figure out what it is. On the note of combat, though, some things I appreciate is that if you are a higher level than nearby enemies, attacking them on the map will instantly kill them and give you the experience and gold you would have gotten, saving you time on having to go through the whole battle screen just for weak enemies. You can also attack enemies that won't die from it in one hit, but you can go into battle with an advantage by having taken some of their health down and stunning them. Also, the battle theme for this game is amazing. Everyone loves the rapping monk in the background to the point where it's basically become an internet meme. This game also has one of my absolute favorite art styles in a video game. I love how the normal gameplay looks like a sketchbook drawing, but there are some pre-rendered cutscenes that are full-on anime. You can tell it's a Persona game just by the stylized menus. Truly, this is one of the best RPGs I have ever played. The combat is satisfying, the characters are lovable, the story is engaging, the soundtrack is banging. Honestly, I can hardly find a single thing wrong with it. It's just a shame that it came out so late in the year and not many people have had the time to get through it all yet. If you plan on playing this, be ready to invest a lot of time into it, but I promise you, you will love every second.
If I say so myself.
That's the last of them! The way's clear! Oh, hey!
Truly the only flawless game to come out this year, and I might be a little biased because I grew up in the 90s, but this game is truly a 90s era 3D mascot platformer collectathon game in the same vein as the ones I grew up with. Taking place after Astro's playroom, Astro and his pals are enjoying a flight on the PS5's ship when the evil alien shows up to steal the CPU chip. Now the bots are spread all across the galaxy, and the remaining shell of the ship, along with the Astro himself, have crash-landed on a desert planet. Now it's up to Astro to travel from planet to planet, galaxy to galaxy, saving the missing robots, taking down evil villains, and restoring peace to the PlayStation universe. At its core, this game plays a lot like modern 3D Mario games, but with the difficulty of Crash Bandicoot. Because whereas Mario games often give you a health bar, this game does not, outside of boss battles. You die in one hit and have to restart at the last checkpoint. There's also something to be said about memorizing patterns and precision platforming, another staple of the Crash Bandicoot series. As you go through the levels and find missing robots, some of them will be dressed up like different video game characters from throughout the PlayStation catalog history. Every time you find one of these little robots, it just triggers the endorphins in the brain that love it when numbers go up. It scratches that kleptomania itch that Pokemon gave us all back in the 90s. Not since the original Spyro the Dragon games have I felt this inclined to 100% complete a game by finding all the secrets and collectibles. On top of the robots, there are also puzzle pieces you can find that will unlock extra things back at your home base, such as a shop where you can change your costume. Also back at your home base is all of the robots that you have saved, and you can use the coins that you've collected to procure items for them from a gacha machine, which will give them unique animations on your home base, some of which lead to trophies. The game might seem childlike in appearance, but don't let that fool you. Although it starts off easy enough, it does slowly get harder and harder. Starting with the second galaxy, there are challenge levels you can unlock that will really test your skills, patience, precision, and speed. These are the kind of levels where you really can't hesitate and think about it, you just have to act on reflex because standing around will get you killed. On top of that, the boss battles get harder and harder as you go, and even after you have beaten the final boss, there's a whole new galaxy of speedrun levels that have been patched into the game that will really put your abilities to the ultimate test. Truly, it was an amazing experience to see so many different games from my childhood make a cameo in here. Finding robots dressed up like characters from games like Wild Arms or Klonoa really took me back. But also seeing characters from really obscure PS3 games like Puppeteer and Tokyo Jungle just really brought a smile to my face. There are also levels in each galaxy that are faithful miniature recreations of different PlayStation games, such as Ape Escape or God of War. Each one translates the mechanics from the game they are based on into Astrobot format, and even has miscellaneous objectives you can do for trophies, such as finding and killing 7 green ravens in the God of War level. Truly, I couldn't find a single thing wrong with this game even if I wanted to. It is by far the most flawless game I have ever played, not only this year, but in several years. There's not a single thing wrong with it. Any frustration I had with this game was due exclusively to my own lack of skill rather than a problem with the game itself. No bugs, no glitches, no microtransactions, no live service crap, no need for anything more than just simple fun gameplay. The way gaming used to be. This is the kind of game that as soon as you finish it, you want to go back and play it again. And this marks only the second time that my personal Game of the Year matches up with the official Game of the Year winner. But man, was it absolutely deserving on both accounts. And there you have it. That was my personal top 10 games of the year list. If you're watching this on the day it came out and you participated in my contest, the winners will be announced next Monday. Let me know your personal favorite games of the year and what your game of the year was in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, Happy New Year, and I'll see you in the Let's Plays. Bye for now!